Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I'll take a while to let everyone get in and get settled. This is, of course, our prolific authors panel. You can tell by the fact that Rad has about 7,000 books on the shelves behind her, all personally penned, I'm sure, and we'll get into that. So just some housekeeping. If you wish to chat, there is a chat bar along the bottom. If you click the chat button, then the chat box will pop up. If you wish to ask questions, make sure you put it in the Q&A box. If you put questions in the chat box, we might miss them, and we're not going to hear the answers. So do make sure that you're using the chat and the Q&A. And also in the chat box, do make sure that you're sending your chat to everyone and not just to a select few. So thank you so much to all of our panelists, our prolific authors. I'm in awe. I've written quite a few books myself, but I know I'm sort of like a baby author compared to many of you. So I'd love to quickly run around the group and allow you all some time to introduce yourselves, say where you're from, your pronouns, and if you can remember the number of books that you've written. So should we start with Greg? Sorry, Greg.
I'm Greg Herren, and I live in New Orleans, and my pronouns are he, him, and I think 43 books. Maybe.
After 30, does it really matter? After 20, does it really matter?
Yeah, I mean, once I got to 20, I had no idea anymore, and I still don't know. I have to count them individually.
I always have to know, yeah.
Yeah. Gun.
My name is Gun Brooke. I live in Sweden, and I have written 31 books and have one editing right now, and one novella and one novel in the works. So.
Wow, very impressive. Julie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Julie Fink. I'm she, her. I am in warm, sunny Phoenix, Arizona today. I have written 21 books, 2 novellas, and I'm working on number 22 right now.
Fantastic. Melissa.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Brayden. I am coming to you from Texas, where it's 28 degrees and really weird here right now. I consider myself a romance novelist who likes to write fun and flirty books. I hope that my readers feel the same too. I definitely write contemporary romance. And as we started talking about number of books, I started racking my brain. I think it's 26 and a third. And I say a third because I wrote one novella back in the day. But other than that, I'm anxious to hear from my fellow panelists how they all do it. I'm going to be taking notes.
Absolutely. And Radclyffe.
I'm Rad, she, her. I am in blustering upstate New York right now. I have had the wonderful privilege for the last 20 years to publish some of these authors, all of these authors, sitting here, which makes me really proud. I have 71 novels. I've edited probably 15 anthologies, most of which we've published. And I am currently embarking on a new adventure with Julie Cannon. Julie and I have co-authored one book, Fire in the Sky, which came out in December. And we're soon to start on the second. And I personally am in the midst of writing Primal Hunt, which is one of my paranormals.
Fantastic. I used to think I was quite impressive for getting over 20, but 70 and more. And yeah, you've definitely got the crown there. Well done, Rad. And I think I speak for everyone when I say thank you as well for, helping everyone else to get their books out in the world. Is a phenomenal achievement for BSB to be at 20 years. So congratulations and thank you. On to the first question. How do you ensure that your latest book isn't similar to something you've written before? And I know that's difficult because obviously there's tropes and themes and things that we write, but how do you make sure that it's not too similar to something you've written before? And a sort of follow-on question, which I struggled with when I was writing, is can you even remember everything you have written before? Do you ever start writing and think, no, I've done this? Should we start with Melissa?
Sure. I do remember everything I've written before. I'm somebody who kind of prides myself in having a good memory. But to the question of how do you keep it fresh and make sure you're not repeating yourself once you get up there in the number of titles, I think I definitely look at trope and theme as I'm coming in, but I have some that are favorites of mine. I love writing a good small town. I love writing a good reunion romance. So when I know I have a lot of those on my backlist and I want to write something new, I take a look at the premise. And to me, the premise is character, setting, plot. And if I can take one of those and give it a hook and give it a twist and make it something unique, then the dramatic action and the story that follows is going to go down a whole separate new path. An example I can give is if, our premise is a group of people are lost in the woods. If I take one of those, if I take character and then decide, you know what, it's going to be a group of 6-year-old Girl Scouts and they're going to be lost in the woods, that's going to create an entirely different story than anything I might have done before. So if I'm struggling to keep it fresh, I'm going to go for a hook of one of those 3 components of the premise.
Oh, that's really interesting. Julie, how about you?
Like Melissa, I can remember pretty much the stories of what I've written. I cannot remember the characters' names. Unless I put a book away, it's kind of away. And again, it's about what's the story I'm thinking about. And every time the story is different. To Melissa's point, there's another hook, there's another aspect or element of it. And as I look at, I have all of my covers framed on the wall. Rad would need a whole hotel to do that. But, I can look at it and say, okay, that was a beach and that was a jungle and that was another beach. And, to try to make sure that I'm not consistently, I don't have a beach every, for 3 books in a row, that kind of thing. But again, it's what's the character and what's the story. And they're all different. So they won't be the same. They might be similar, but they won't be the same. My problem is I have some favorite phrases that I seem to use a lot. And I use them a lot in one book. And so I'm sure I use them a lot in all of my books. So I try real hard to, make sure that I don't overuse them as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the real difficult things once you find something you enjoy writing. Sometimes
Right.
that sentence can pop up a few times. Gun, how about you? How do you ensure your latest work isn't similar to something you've previously written?
Well, that can be a little hard since I do have my favorite tropes, and even if I don't write my romances as a series per se, they tend to take place in my fictitious town of East Key in Rhode Island, and some old character make cameos and show up. But I think as long as it's character driven for me, that there is such, I hope, strong individuals with their strong individual past, then they will always make different choices that will take them down different paths. And so I think that's what I hope. What I'm really nervous about is reusing names by mistake and stuff. So I always have to have a spreadsheet with names and stuff like that, because once I've named someone, as little as I could ever take away the name of any of my kids, I couldn't change the names of my characters. The main protagonists. So that's probably my biggest fear, is calling someone something twice. So
yeah, I understand that. Greg, how about you?
Well, like Melissa, I used to have a really good memory, so I never really was overly concerned about it. And then I think it was after the 8th Scotty book, maybe, somebody asked me a question posted on Facebook and asked me, how many car accidents has Scotty been in? And then I started thinking about it, and it's like, 7 or 8.
Poor Scotty.
So I put a scene in the new one where he talks about how much he hates cars because he gets into so many accidents, but he didn't get into it.
Yeah, just thinking of those insurance premiums. Yeah, that's
I also have a bad tendency. I gravitate towards always using names that start with the letters J or L for some reason. And I catch myself doing that. Everyone's an L name in a book. And say, no, I've got to change that. That's confusing. But I have noticed, because when when I'm writing the series books as opposed to standalones, I've noticed that sometimes in standalones I'll reuse the same names. Like I have several standalone books that have a main character named Scotty, which I didn't even think about when I was doing it. It's like, oh, that's somebody asked me about I was on a panel and somebody asked me about a character I'd written named Scotty, and I just immediately defaulted to the series, and that's not what they were talking about. That was kind of embarrassing, actually. So yeah, don't use the same names over. It'll come back to haunt you.
And you know, when you pick names, you got to make sure they're easy to type, because you're going to say that same name 489 times in the first 5 chapters, and you've got to make sure it's an easy name to type.
I sometimes use those accents, those French accent they put on letters, on vowels with character names, and I don't know how to do that on a Windows computer. So that gets I have to do a lot of finding and replacing later when I should just stop using the accents, but that's easy.
Where's the challenge in that? Rad, how about you? How do you ensure your latest work isn't similar to what you've written before?
When I first started writing, the first 8 books I wrote were before I thought about being published, and I had written them over a long period of time, like probably 15 years. And I reread them a lot because I wrote them just for myself. I didn't really even share them with anybody. They were just stories that I would like to read that I couldn't find. So I knew those books and those characters really well. I know all the books I've written, but I can't, if you said to me right now, you picked a book that I wrote 15 years ago, it would take me a while to remember the characters' names. But so I know everything I've written, but it's not totally right there at the front of my mind. I especially can't remember eye color for sure. So even when I'm writing a series, if I haven't written that series for 3 or 4 years, I have to go back and look at hair color. I know the mannerisms, I know their voice, I know their issues, I know them as people, but the little things like the color of their hair and their eye color, I have to double check. I agree with what everyone has said. I think that what individuates a work are the characters. I mean, I try to write different stories because I'm interested in writing about different things. Actually, most of my plots are relatively different, with the exception of series, where I think that you're going to have the same setting, you're going to have the same characters, and you're probably going to have the same issues coming up for the characters in that series. So they're going to be a lot more similar. And in a lot of ways, that's more difficult to individuate, I think, than just standalones. I think that the issues that characters face, and Gunn said, backstory, and those issues come from backstory. That's what makes every character unique. And as soon as you have those unique characters with unique issues, it doesn't matter if they're in the same small town down the street and interacting with characters the readers are going to know. It's going to be a different book.
Yeah, completely agree. We're getting some great questions coming in. Do keep them coming. So one of the first questions is from Carol, and she says, do you ever go back and read the books you've written? I don't imagine any of you have time, but we're gonna try. Julie, do you ever go back and read anything you've written?
I haven't, no. And I think by the time I'm done with it and it hits published, I have read it so many times. I don't read it anymore because I know it. You write it, you edit it 3 or 4 times, and you proof it 3 or 4 times, and by then you're done. I did pull out one of them a couple of days ago to see something. I was looking for something. I thought, how did I phrase that in this other book, maybe? And I pulled something out and I read maybe a couple of pages, and I thought, dang, that's pretty good. But I didn't, so no, I have not gone back in, because you're right, I don't necessarily have the time. I'd rather read somebody else's than my own.
Yeah, completely understand. And sometimes I think reading something of yours from the past will also detract you from what you're currently writing. So there's obviously a bit of difficulty there. Melissa, do you ever go back and read anything you've written?
I did early on when I had just a couple of books out because I was so excited to be published. And it was such, I don't want to say a romantic experience, but it felt that way between me and the story and the book. And once the story was out there, I really missed it. And I remember that first book, I would go back and read certain scenes just to remind myself. And nowadays, I don't go back and read the same way I would with those first couple of books, but I do, like Julie, use the books as research tools. And it's interesting to pick up some early ones and just see how my writing style has changed. It's a little jarring to see. I thought it was pretty much the same with just me learning as I've gone, but I really do think that the style has even shifted a bit. But I'm somebody who likes to put Easter eggs in books and shout outs to past characters and have cameos happen. And sometimes I want to pull out the book to be sure that I have the information right. The book that I have coming out next month in February, I use a character from Strawberry Summer in the book, Courtney. And I was trying to remember, like, when Courtney, we left her off, what exactly was her status? So I did go back and read the end of that book to kind of remember where we left her. So what changes I could make to her life and show where she's at now.
Yeah. I imagine that's quite important to be able to link those two up. Rad, how about you? Do you go back and read any of your collection?
Yeah, not anymore. But I, like Melissa and everyone else who's been talking about series or books that have cameos, I do go back. I'm writing Primal Hunt right now, which is number 8, I think, in the Midnight Hunters series. And I had to go back and look at quite a few of the previous books because I have so many species in the books, vampires and weres and fae, and I couldn't remember certain aspects that I needed to bring back in this book. So I did go back and refresh myself. What did I say about, vampires and blood servants, for example? So, I needed to reference the works that I had previously written. But other than that, I don't have time. And I'm almost always busy writing the new one. I mean, that's where my mind needs to be, is in the work. I don't write 2 things at one time, for example. I mean, I only write one thing at a time because that's what drives my process, is that book in progress.
Yeah, makes sense. Greg, how about you? Do you have time to read your books?
I didn't used to reread my books. I'm never satisfied with what I've written. And so whenever I used to go back and read stuff that I'd already written, I would edit it. So I would always find the stuff that's wrong. I couldn't shut off the editor brain. So it just became embarrassing because, I shouldn't have said it that way. I should have done this better. Oh, this is a better way to say this. This would be more better, fits the character better. I should have said this. I should have done this. And it became awful. So I stopped and just, okay, I'm never going to read anything I've written again. But my memory started to go. And when you're writing a series, it's really hard it's hard to remember. I mean, the first Scotty book came out 21 years ago. And I can remember when I was writing the third one, I couldn't remember what his mother's name was because it's written in the first person and he always just says mom. And so I just assumed, he just calls her mom. I mean, why would he mention her by name, even in the text, rather than dialogue? Because he just calls her mom. So I gave her a name. I'd also given her a name in the first book that was completely different. So I had to fix that at some point. Unfortunately, when the first book was done as an ebook, finally, I was able to change it. So all evidence is now in the used bookstores. But I started reading them again because during COVID, I couldn't focus on reading. I couldn't finish reading a book. I couldn't read somebody else's book. I just couldn't. It wasn't anything against the books I was trying to read. It's just that my mind just couldn't get absorbed into the story the way I would want to be. And so I started rereading old books that I'd already read before. So it's like, well, at least I know how this ends. And then it was really amazing to me how many of the stories I'd completely forgotten. And then I started rereading mine and my earlier stuff, just to think, oh, this will be cringy. I would like to think I'm much better than I was 20 years ago. And it's not that I'm a better writer now. When I go back and read the old books, I can just see the difference.
Mhm.
You know, how I've changed and how I've evolved and how the characters have changed and evolved. I mean, when Scotty first started, he was a 29-year-old personal trainer stripper who didn't really have a lot of money, and now he's in a three-way relationship and they have a teenage pseudo son, and he just bought a house, and it's like, who are these people? Who are these people? These aren't the people who started writing. But it's been 20 years and I've had them age in real time, though I'm trying not to. I didn't want to do I didn't want to do the pandemic in a book, but I didn't see how I could not do the pandemic in a book, because New Orleans is a real place, and I write about a real place. Like, I couldn't not write about Katrina.
Mhm.
And when Katrina happened, it put my books in a certain period of time. Scotty was 29 when Katrina happened. That was in 2005. It can't be just the ambiguous now, which is what I had been doing before. And so then I had to have him, he was going to be 29 forever, basically. It was going to be one of those books series where the character doesn't age. You never think about stuff like that. But when you're writing about a real place and real things happen, you do end up being anchored into time. And so then I realized it's like, well, it'd be interesting to write about how he ages and how he changes as he gets older and how he matures and I wasn't sure how people would like that, but people have responded to it. So I think we're at about 2018 now in the books, but.
It's really interesting, like how you need to sort of look at times as well, especially when you're writing a series and think, you know, are these people frozen permanently in this time, or am I going to follow? So Gun, speaking of time, do you have time to read your old books?
Like Melissa said, I did very much in the beginning because I was just so stunned that I was being published and published in America. And it was so, you know, unlikely. So I did reread my books. And these days, sometimes I will read one of the older ones just to also see how's my English doing. And also I like to listen to the audiobook versions, those that are out. So I think that's fun.
Did anybody else listen to the audiobook?
I can't.
I can't either.
And it's not that the narrators or the voice artists aren't doing a fabulous job. They're so good. I can listen to any of your books on audio, just not my own.
Your own.
It's just a personal thing.
Very strange. Yeah.
Same way. It's like, that's not, I haven't even done it. I haven't even done one because I'd be afraid of, but that's not how I picture my character.
Yeah,
that I just can't. I'm a huge audiobook fan, but I can't do my own now. So good for you, Gun.
It's like seeing yourself on video, isn't it? You don't necessarily recognize yourself. You don't necessarily recognize how someone would read your words.
That's how I hear the story in my head.
Yeah. So another question we're talking about the process of time here now, and obviously we all change as we write. Has your favorite book of your own, putting on your egos for a moment, has that changed as you've written more? Like, and what is it that you think makes you go, I really loved that book for 5 years that I'd written, but now I've changed as a writer and my favorite book is now changing? Like, what is that progression? And has your favorite book changed? Do you still just love that one book that you wrote 20 years ago and that is always going to be your favorite? And I'm going to go with the person who looks least bothered by this question, and I'm going to say Gun, who I think may have an answer to this straight away.
Wow. You mistake a vacant look for something else.
Well, you don't look as confused as everyone else is rapidly going through their back catalogue.
I think the first book will always be the favorite, because how could it not, in a way? But I think as time has progressed and the way that I write and the way that I construct, especially when I write sci-fi, the way that I do my world building, I think I really love, and I'm the most proud of to date, I should say, Lunar Eclipse. That is a standalone science fiction where it's quite a unique planet. At least I haven't read anything like that before. And my husband, when he was among us, he was very well read science fiction lover, and always asked him if my sci-fi was reasonably original. And this particular book, he said he had never read anything like that. So I think that's the book that has a very special place in my heart. So the first one, which was Course of Action, and Lunar Eclipse. So yes.
Fantastic. That's really lovely to hear. Greg, how about you? Do you have a favorite, and has that changed over the years?
That's hard to say. I think they're all favorites in a certain way, in a different way, for different reasons. Like Glenn said, my first book is always special to me because it was my first book, but it's not my favorite because it wasn't. I didn't think it would ever be published. It was just a practice book that I wrote to see if I could actually write a private eye novel. And so I just did it very basically, and okay, this is the one I'll try. I'm going to try to get agent with it. I'll try to get it published. I'm not going to try, but I didn't expect anything to happen with it because, it was just for practice, and it got published, which was kind of shocking to me. And because it's not that it's a bad book, it's just that I just didn't think. It was one that I didn't take seriously. It was one that I wasn't like, oh, this is the one that's going to get me published. It was just like, oh, this is just for practice, and then I'll write something better. That I'll try. I'll get all that out of the way. But certain ones are favorites for certain reasons. Like I think my Murder in the Rue Charters is probably one of the best that other people consider one of my better books. It won a Lambda Award. It was my post-Katrina book. But like Bury Me in Shadows is one of my favorite books because that's one that I wrote about family history, racism, homophobia, rural Alabama, which is where I'm from. That one's currently a favorite. And usually when it comes to the series, it's whatever the last one I wrote is my favorite in the series. But I think Bury Me in Shadows is probably right now is my favorite book because it was very personal. It was very personal for me, and it was very therapeutic. Hopefully my family won't read it.
Let's hope. Melissa, how about you?
I don't think that my favorites change over the years, but I do think I have like a favorite shelf, if you will, and I add to it. And most books don't make it onto the favorite shelf. I mean, that's just natural, I think. But I'd say there are 5 of the 26, I think, books. I think there are 5 or 6 that I would say are my favorites. And they're not necessarily the award-winning books, but I do notice that they sell pretty good. The ones that are my favorites seem to be favorites of my audience as well. And so I take comfort in that. And I also notice a correlation to the writing experience that I had. When I have a really fantastic writing experience, I notice I like the end product a lot more, and it does tend to do well with my readership as well. So when I'm writing a book and it doesn't feel like it's going well, but I'm trying to do the best that I can, and then you kind of cross your fingers when you put it out there, and then maybe it doesn't sell as well, and you think, well, yeah. I wasn't, and then another one comes along that it grabs your heart and it goes on that favorite shelf. So I don't think I've taken any off the shelf, but every 5 or 6 books, I probably add one to it.
Yeah, that's a good way to see it. How about you, Rad?
I think that for me, a favorite book is a book of the heart. It's the story that I love and the characters that I love, and I don't care about the writing. And that hasn't changed from the time I wrote them, which was now probably 25 years ago. So the books that the book, if you said to me, what is your favorite book? Most people would not guess it. And it's Love's Melody Lost. It was, to me, that was the book of my heart. And I wrote it very early on. And I'm sure the writing is not nearly as, hopefully, as, I think 70 books later, hopefully I write better. So I have books that I think this is a really good book. I've written this really well. This is really solid. Technically, I'm really happy with it. And I have a lot of books like that I'm pleased with. There are books like Melissa's, as Melissa was saying, I feel like I'm really slogging my way through. And usually when I get done, I'm pretty happy with it, but the process wasn't as fluid as I hoped it would be, or the scenes didn't come to me as easily as they sometimes do. Mm-hmm. I think when you're a published professional author, the end product is going to be good, because you don't get to write this many books unless you're a pretty good author. You're just not going to keep at it all this time. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the product is exceptional. And sometimes you just love it because you love the characters and you love the story. I mean, that's the creative part of what we do. And they don't always go hand in hand.
Absolutely true. Julie, how about you?
It's like asking us that have children which one we love the most.
Absolutely. That's the next question on the list.
And it varies by day. It varies by what's going on. And how come they got more M&Ms than I did? Well, because I love them more than I love you today. So it's not your turn. I don't know if I have a favorite one. I have those that have probably touched me more than others. It's obviously the first one, because to Gunn's point, you are stunned that you're actually being published, and people want to pay you to do this, and people want to use their own hard-earned money to read what you've written, and it's still just stunning as to how that happens. So Come and Get Me was my first one, and it's probably still my best seller, one of my better sellers, to Melissa's point also. And it was just like, that's the book. I think, we're all proud of certain books for certain reasons. It could be, I know one of them I wrote, there was just like this crap that was going on in my life that goes on in everybody's life. And I was able to put out a book, and it was pretty darn good. So I was proud of myself that I was able to slog through or get through this, using this part of my life to help me deal with that part of my life. And so I think each book has a different meaning. Certainly those that have been nominated for like Lammys and Goldies and things like that, those are the ones that we're probably the most proud of, because other people have found them both a great story but technically sound, but really more importantly a great story. So I think each one is different. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. We briefly touched on names earlier, but let's go back to names. Now, famously, one of the first books I wrote, every male character who was not who had sort of under a couple of pages in the book was the same name, and there were 4 of them, and I had 4 Davids in the book, and I didn't notice because I didn't care about them. But my editor noticed, and she flagged it quite quickly, and that's when I realized I was terrible with names, and I had to write every name I was using down. So when it comes to names in your books, do you avoid using the same names over and over again, or do you feel that characterization is enough? Do you remember the names you use? Do you have a helpful little spreadsheet? What's your sort of like naming process? And are you comfortable to use similar names? Obviously now, Greg, you've obviously mentioned that we have multiple Scotties in the world, but what's your process when you're thinking about names?
Well, I'm very weird when it comes to writing to begin with, and that it's very difficult for me to, like when I hear other writers say that they're writing something but they don't know what the characters' names are, or they don't know what the name of the story is, I'm just like, how can you write without knowing who what the characters' names are, or what the title is? Because that's where I always start. I start with the title and and the name of the characters. I do notice that, especially with young adult stuff, that I don't really know what the common names for teenagers are today. And I just go by watching things on television, and I kind of, there's some very bizarre names. People are naming their children around the turn of the century that are in the 90s. But I don't really think about it a whole lot. It just seems like they name themselves in some ways. You know, that's who they are, and that's what their name should be. And I can't really explain it more than that. It just seems right. And sometimes I don't like giving people characters placeholder names, because the entire time I'm writing about them, that's not their name. That's not their name. That's not their name. That's not their name. And it bothers me too much. I've had to change names of characters before. And I did this incredibly stupid thing with one book where character had twin sons. And I thought, oh, she's the kind of person who would name her sons Tyler and Taylor. Oh, that was a huge mistake. Huge mistake, because trying to keep track of who Taylor was and who Tyler was, huge nightmare. And it didn't occur to me and it wasn't until I turned the book in that I thought, you could have changed their names. Nobody knew. It wasn't written in stone. But sometimes I'll just see a name and I like it, like in the news or something. There's one name that I've always wanted to use that I haven't used, because when we first moved to New Orleans, there was a young girl who was missing, and it was all over the news all of the time. And she had a very Louisiana name, and it's terrible that you were laughing at a teenager who was missing, but her name was Crystal Champagne. And it's like, I've always wanted to use that as a character name, but editors will often tell me that you can't, because no one will believe that someone has that name. So I'll probably use it for a drag queen.
Yeah, sounds wise. I was once sort of called old by one of my editors, not a BSB editor. After I handed in a manuscript, she emailed me back and said, if you ever want help with young people names, let me know. And I thought, could you just take this knife out?
How dare you? How dare you?
I mean, how helpful, how lovely, but also thanks. And then she prefaced it and said, any American names? And I was like, But yeah, so that was fun. Melissa, how about you? What's your naming strategy?
I'm not against reusing names, but I do take some things into consideration, which is, first of all, how long ago I've used the name. If the character I'm thinking of reusing the name for was very popular, I'm not going to do it. There are certain characters that each author you're identified with, these certain characters that became very popular with your readership, and I could never duplicate one of those names. Also, the size of the character. I'm probably not going to name two main characters the same thing, but I might name two secondary characters the same thing in books that were written far apart from each other. I have a brief anecdote, which earlier in this panel, I said that I prided myself on my memory. Well, that was overconfidence at one point, because in the last Lavender Sister, the book, Aster and Bryn are the two main characters, and there is a girlfriend of Aster's who kind of comes between them and is quite difficult and messes with their relationship. And then those two characters show back up in Marigold, and I decided they should have a baby, and I named the baby after the ex-girlfriend, and I caught it right before the book went to print. Like, it was a stop the presses moment, like, Goldstrokes, you gotta help me out. I've done this awful thing. And to Sandy's credit, we got there in time, and we were able to change that baby's name, because the readers would have gone nuts if I had named that baby after the ex-girlfriend from the last book. That's on me.
She did what?
You're kidding me, right? Fired. Thank you
Yeah,
for
that's a
not.
lucky save. Well done, Sandy.
Oh,
So
man.
no more overconfidence on the memory, but
Yeah, I know my limits. I have no memory at all. I write everything down. I highly recommend spreadsheets. Julie, how about you?
I don't reuse them, no. I usually when I start a book, I have some idea of who the character is, so her name just kind of comes to me. One of the things that I have learned in my multiple years of writing is make sure that your two main character names don't sound the same, because then it's too hard. People get them confused. And I've read books before where it's Susie and Sherry and who's who, and so I try to keep that in mind. The book I'm writing now, the book 2 to the Red Sky Romance series with Rad, I was writing something about an architect, and the name Hadley just popped out of my head, and I thought that's a cool name for an architect, Hadley. And then in a different scene, another secondary character, I named her Ashley because I know she sounds like an Ashley. She would be kind of an Ashley, but Ashley and Hadley are too close together. So Rad, I'm working on figuring out what's a different name because those are too close together because they'll be the main characters in book 3. So if they were the minor characters and you never saw them again, it wouldn't be a big deal. But because they're going to be in the next book, they'll sound too much the same, and it's too hard to keep them apart. But names are tough. They can be really tough because you have some idea of what your character is, and then what would that be? And like Rad, some of my characters, well, probably most of my characters, one of the main protagonists has a slightly androgynous name. Elliot or Hadley or Riley or something like that. That's just kind of the way my mind thinks a little bit.
Very interesting. Yeah, it can be very difficult when they're very similar, especially when you're thinking about audiobooks and things like that and how they're going to sound, because it's not always necessarily just when they're written down, it's how they sound. I used to always remember that. Rad, how about you with 70 books? How are you finding new names?
I try not to repeat names only after learning early on in my books that the landscape was littered with Kates. And I don't know how that happened, but they were everywhere. And if you want a crossover, which I've done, which I started doing early on, is that all of a sudden, if I wanted to cross over one book from a series to another and I had to be really careful that I don't have characters with the same names. So I do not repeat names. I agree with Julie. It's really important, even when you're not thinking about audio, but you should be thinking about audio. Many readers sound the name out in their mind so that they're hearing the names. And if they're very similar, they are going to be confusing. And most of our books, the characters are all the same, gender. So you don't use distinguishing, pronouns as often as you might. So that's an issue. I, like Julie, almost always have, most of my characters actually, at least one has an androgynous name because that's kind of the way I work. I mean, my characters tend to be somewhat polarized in terms of kind of gender attributes. So I will usually have one character at least with an androgynous name and the other character with just kind of, I'm not going to say girly. I'm not going to say that. Kind of a just, neutral name. And I pick the name before I start the book, like Julie. I think about what's the book going to be about? And then I pick the names of the main characters before I start to write. I can't write it without that. I mean, the names are integral to me, to the characterization. It all flows from there. So that's kind of how I do it.
Yeah, makes sense. No person A and person
I
B.
look at name lists.
Get those names.
I look at lists of names all the time because it's not easy to come up with names you haven't used before.
Yeah. I think I started repeating and I only got sort of 25 novels and I was like, it's going to have to be another whatever because I couldn't find anything through my baby lists. Gun, how about you?
I try really, not to repeat name, but when it comes to secondary character, and especially guys, I seem to think that they have to either be called Gregory or Trevor. And at one point, I wrote a book where I forgot about the characters. So Shelley wrote me back, my editor, and said, "What happened to Gregory Horton?" And I was like, "Oh God, he's still at the hotel." It's like, gotta go get him. And so, but this makes me think of the book that I'm editing now. It's a dystopian book called Skyscraper. And I have Kaylin, who they call her Kay for short. And then the other one is Rain. That might be a mistake. I don't know. I have to talk to Shelley. I hope I don't have to rename anyone. But I tried to go behindthename.com is my go-to page for names, because you can see where it comes from, what countries or ethnicity and stuff like that. And there is behind the surname as well, because and then there are the Swedish point of view, where I name someone an English name, an English sounding name, and my Swedish friends and other readers that are Swedish, they go like, "What did you name them?" And the prime example is one character I had named Blythe. I thought it was so exotic for me. I thought it was great. And all my Swedish friends were like, "Blythe?" It's like, sounds very odd in Swedish when you think about it. So, no, I try to be original with the names, and yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it is tricky. I think we've all had naming difficulties, but we all seem to have a way around it. So, final question. After all these books, do you still enjoy the writing process? Are you still as in love with it as you was? Has it changed over the years? Is it sometimes a little harder because of the back catalogue, or do you feel that you've found your stride now and that you can just whip off another 70? Rad, should we start with you?
It's a lot harder than it was at the beginning, because I'm smarter than I was at the beginning, or maybe not quite as naive as I was at the beginning, because I didn't really think about the writing process. When I first started, I just wanted to write a story, and I was just consumed with the characters and their story, and I wasn't thinking about how I was writing it or what might make the story better if I understood more of the technical aspects of story. And I think that I do now, over years of practice and learning and studying the craft and being edited. So I think that I know a lot more about writing, and because I do, sometimes I think that I'm more critical as I work than I was at the very beginning. But what makes writing still enjoyable for me is the same thing that it always was, which is those moments when it really just comes. It's just automatic. The words flow, they feel good. The characters are alive on the page. And when you're done, you just know, you have that feeling, I just did this well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the artistic part, I think, for all of us as artists.
Yeah. There's a technicality to it, and there's an artistry to it, and sometimes it's difficult to balance. Gun, how about you? Do you still enjoy the writing process?
Very much, for the most part, yes. But I agree with Rad. The more you know, the more you learn. And I have this desire that I want every book to be better than the previous one, but I know that's sort of a utopian point of view, because our lives come and go in ebb and flows, and so does the writing and everything with it. But then I'm also part of my writing the books is also I create my own covers, and I do paint as well. So it's so tied into my whole artistic life, and I don't know how we'd be able to breathe without it. this is my thing that I do when I couldn't be a neonatal nurse. This is what I became, and I love it. And I'm grateful for every single day that anyone wants to buy and read my books and to work with Bold Strokes. I'm just wouldn't have it any other way.
Fantastic to hear. Melissa, how about you? Do you think there's another 25 that you can easily write?
I try not to look that far ahead because that is very intimidating. So I look one book at a time. But it is harder, and I identify with everything that I'm hearing, because in the beginning I was writing for myself and it was all about what I enjoyed. And then secondarily, I would realize it was going out to others. And nowadays I'm very aware of an audience, and I'll have an idea and it won't meet my standard. And back in the day, I wouldn't have had that standard. I would have taken the idea and run with it. So sometimes I want to get out of my own way, and just find the creativity that I had early on. And some days I'm more successful at doing that than others, but it's an ongoing process.
Absolutely, yeah. Julie, how about you? Do you still enjoy that process?
You know, it kind of ebbs and flows. There's like, you know, you're really in it, or you just have to put your ass in the chair and make yourself do it. I think the last book I wrote, the first book I wrote with Red, Fire in the Sky, I had never had so much pressure on me to write a book ever, because I'm writing it with Rad, and she's going to see the first draft, and I'm thinking, this has got to be so damn good. And it was enjoyable because it was a story that I wanted to get out, but I thought, what's she going to think of this? You know, I mean, it's Radclyffe. She's got 70 books. What's she going to think of this? But then I thought, well, obviously she thinks I'm a pretty good writer. Otherwise she wouldn't have asked me to do it. And so the second book is going on a lot easier because I don't have that, like, what's she going to think of this scene? Is she going to think this scene is trash or something like that? So, you know, to Melissa's point, sometimes you just have to get out of your head and get it on the page, and then go back and think, this is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So it does ebb and flow. I find I have less time now to write than I did before. So it's hard to carve out the time to do it. But it's just something that because you love it, you find the time to do it.
Absolutely. Greg, how about you? Do you want to finish us up and tell us if you still enjoy the writing process?
I enjoy writing still. I enjoy creating. I like creating characters. I like coming up with a story. I like coming up with all the steps along the way to get to the conclusion of the book. Not so far with deadlines, as Brad and Sandy know. Not very good at meeting deadlines. Sometimes I always have to make myself do it. It's this really, I have this really bizarre self-destructive thing going on in my head where I'm just really, really lazy, and I have to make myself do things that I enjoy, and then I do it, and then I enjoy it, and then I think, why do you have to make yourself do things you enjoy? But I do enjoy it all still. I enjoy the process. I even enjoy editing and redrafting stuff. I like every bit of it. I miss the day. I don't go into I used to go into what I called the zone, where I would sit down and I would just start writing, and then the next thing I knew, 4 hours had gone by and I was just done, and I'd written like 6,000 or 7,000 words. That doesn't happen anymore. I miss that. But my schedule is different. I'm older. I don't have the energy that I had 10 years ago. So sometimes you have to adjust your process to what you're capable of doing too. And sometimes you have to force yourself to do it. And the advice of, you know, you can always fix it, but you have to have something to fix is really what makes me do it. It's like, oh, well, you know, it's going to be garbage, but at least you can fix it later. And you'll enjoy fixing it later as you're thinking to yourself, thank God no one else is going to see this stuff. So yeah, I don't know if I could do that, Julie. Nobody.
Yeah, well done, Julie, I have to say. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you to our audience, and thank you to our panelists, not only for being here, but also for the incredible amount of literature that you're putting out into the world. I know that everyone's very grateful. And thank you to Sandy for sitting in the background and doing all of the technical stuff so we don't have to. So hang around, and there's a lot more coming up today and tomorrow. And I hope you enjoy the other panels.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda.